I'm Mary Roeder. I'm the programming manager at UMS. I'm really happy to be joined today by folks from Geoff Sobelle's home. This was one of the early pandemic cancellations in April of 2020. And we're really excited that we've been able to invite the company back to be with us in April of 2022 at the Power Center in Ann Arbor. And just to start things off, I would love it if you all could introduce yourselves and talk about your paths to becoming artists and creators. Geoff, we'll start with you.
Okay. Well, my name is Geoff, and I am one of the creator and performers of Home. I kind of instigated the project, which just means that I invited people in with that idea. And that's such a great question. What's the path to becoming an artist? Well, when I was a little kid, I think I really always wanted to be in Cats. I saw Cats when I was a little kid, and I saw if you could like fly across the stage in a cat costume on a trapeze, that seemed pretty great. And pretty much everything fell out from there. I had a lifelong obsession with magic, and yeah, I guess these like childhood obsessions never really left. So yeah, I still sort of jump around in a cat costume doing magic tricks is really, I think, my career in a nutshell. But I think moving to Philadelphia was a big thing for me. I had met the Pig Iron Theater gang at a physical theater school in France called the Lecoq School. And I had moved to New York before that. And my feeling of those two cities was like I moved to New York and sort of like saw people I knew had known before, but I moved to Philly and suddenly met all kinds of new people and new artists. And as opposed to my experience in New York, which had been like meeting a lot of actors who were a little hesitant to make things because they needed to be available for like, you know, whatever cop show was filming the next day. In Philly, it was like everybody was just making things, and there was this really interesting cross disciplinary world of dance and theater and visual art. And very soon after I came to Philadelphia, actually, I met Steven Dufala, depending on where the angle is here. So Steven's really like an one of the first people I met in Philadelphia doing the first project with Pig Iron that I had done. And we began a friendship and a conversation that has like had many iterations over the years. And actually that collaboration with Steven kind of embodies something that I feel like I very luckily fell into with Pig Iron and that Philly world, which was about really leaning into different collaborative methods and doing things you don't know how to do and finding people who may have a better idea than you, even if it's not something they've done before. So we'll talk about it, I'm sure, but in Home, we were all of us were working on things that none of us had actually ever really done before, but borrowing from each other's backgrounds and educations, we were able to do that. And then with Pig Iron started a school 10 years ago or more, 11 years ago. Is that true, Jen? 11 years ago? And at that school, I met both Jen Kidwell and Justin Rose, who are at the core of Home. And I'm just like going on and on and on. So sorry.
Well, you've answered a number of the questions that I have for you because I want to talk about Philadelphia.
But maybe I'll let other folks introduce themselves.
I'm Jen Kidwell. I'm one of the performers in Home. And I I think there was this like 1980s televised Alice in Wonderland that had a really formative it left quite an impression on me. So I'll just drop that nugget in the old, like, how did you become an artist thing? I grew up playing violin, but I don't do that so much anymore. But that's kind of how I tumbled into art. And I think it's just, I tried to 9 to 5 it, and it just is not a good fit. And I did some training kind of things in and around New York, but a real like turning moment for me was actually seeing a show that was a collaboration of Stevie D and Geoff, which was called Machines, 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 Machines in New York. And that is kind of like, I saw that. And then because I was there, I ended up seeing Chekhov Lizard Brain. And because I went there, I ended up getting the information about the school that Geoff mentioned that was starting, Pig Iron's training program. And I had this moment where I was either going to move to Germany with no knowledge of German or know anyone, or enroll at Pig Iron School. And I ended up getting into Pig Iron, and the head of the program told me that he thought that Philadelphia was the Berlin of the United States, and I believed him. Geoff knows this story. And so then I ended up in Philly, where I got to study with Geoff and even Stevie D. Actually, Steven and his brother came in and did like a workshop, or a talk rather. And then ended up working with both of them after graduating. And here I am today.
Steven, you're up.
All right. Hi, I'm Steven. So how did I get here? Going way back. So I have 4 brothers, and both my parents are pianists, so it was always a really creative household. And my 2 older brothers were already making things. Like everybody just made things all the time. So I don't think it was really a decision of any kind. It's just how it always was. And we were visual artists, musicians, skateboarders. We made the ramps that we rode on, so like everything we wanted to use, we made. So that's just kind of the world that I grew up in. And then I went to art school and moved to Philly, and kind of immediately realized that even though it was a really creative world I was from, it was very small. And I started meeting all these people doing all these things I had never seen before or experienced. So I didn't know anything about theater. I dated a dancer for a little while. That introduced me to that world. We started making work together. And then I met Pig Iron while I was studying printmaking, and started working with them as an assistant for James Sugg, who was doing the music. So it was like kind of all sides of it. And then with Pig Iron, they realized that I could do a bunch of other things. And then so all of a sudden I was like roped in to a bunch of other small projects. And also like, that was also kind of the gateway drug for it in a lot of ways, because there weren't edges to any of the fields. Like they all blurred together, and that felt super exciting and kind of perfect if you're not comfortable landing in one place or one discipline.
And if you could describe your role with Home specifically, what is your part in that, in the creation of that piece?
Kind of thinking of what the home would be, what the structure of that was, what the shape, like what the container for all the people were, and that kind of stuff. But it's like, it wasn't clear at all for a long time that it was going to look like a house. And so a big part of the work was figuring out if that was the move or if that was the logic. And so for that meant for me just being in the room a lot and like watching these guys freak out and trying to make sense of that, trying to like see what that was made of and see what that environment wanted to be.
We're going to switch gears to talk a little bit about process. And I think the first question, we'll start with Geoff. Do you see your work as being part of a tradition? So physical theater, clown.
You know something, I remember an interview with Tom Waits that was like a long, long time ago, where he said, in the beginning you just imitate. And I think it's kind of true. If you hear his like early stuff, he sounds like, he's like trying his best at like Leadbelly or something like that. And it's like old blues and jazz and that kind of thing. And then there's a moment where he had found his own voice. And I would say maybe something similar, that the kinds of things I've been excited about have been like really the worlds of like silent film clown. That was like the thing that made my toe tap, was like the films of Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin. And partly it was that there was I found them so funny, but I also found all of the inventions so sort of delicious, that they were like inventing cinematic technique, and they had made all this stuff themselves. And then also were entrepreneurial and were even political. If you think of Chaplin and United Artists, and there was like agendas actually. And all of that I found really heady and exciting. So definitely there's that. I did go to the Lecoq School, where you are exposed to Commedia dell'arte, and Commedia dell'arte was something that I was exposed to a long time ago. And there is something about that actually in those Chaplin films they do as well. And I think there are filmmakers who also do this, even now, where you have like a beat map, or like you're going to hit certain things, but you don't know how you're going to quite get there. And so you find your way there, you improvise your way there. And that's definitely how we made Home. It's how I made a lot of things. And part of it is like an aversion to writing, and part of it's but I think that is born out of a kind of like, I believe in this thing, this alchemy that happens in the room with all the people and all the energy and all the stuff, that it's just, you find the good stuff when you're like goofing around and you're in this like play mode.
So Geoff, you talked a little bit about magic and illusion being a childhood obsession. And I'm curious how you made the leap to including elements of that in your work. I've seen the object lesson and Home, and I've seen the use of illusion in both of those pieces. So curious how you came to use that in your work. And then Steven and Jen, like, what is it like having to kind of design for or perform illusion in Home?
Well, Jen loves magic. This has to just be said right out the gate.
Thank you so much for saying that.
As much as I love performing.
Thank you so much for saying that.
Mary, I've always loved magic, and when I got into the theater, I think I started doing plays, but I'm not sure that's what actually I was excited about. I told you that story of like Rumpelteazer or whoever that was, like flying through the air and cats. I'm serious when I say, like, I think that was the thing that I was excited about. I was never really excited about like dramatic structure or like a well-told story or even really memorizing lines. I mean, I do those things and I enjoy them, but there was something else that I was like excited about. And it was something that was happening in those silent films, the Keaton and the Chaplin and whatever, that there was like a transformational possibilities. And there was like, there was visual trickery. And I think that's what I was excited about trying to figure out. So I studied magic. I was deep into magic, but also I was like, I don't think it was ever in the cards for me to be like a magician. That is a different kind of thing. And I have great respect, and also don't love that world necessarily wholesale. But there's a lot to be sort of gleaned from it. And a long time ago, while I was at Lecoq, actually, it was like a really long time ago, I had that idea for somebody in a bed who would transform. And the idea at the time was like, what if there were a couple in a bed making love or being together or something? And all of a sudden it was like one of the people kind of rolled over and suddenly they were alone and they just very nonchalantly like made the bed. And I thought, oh, that would be very moving in a way, because you're like, where did they go? And somehow it's like, that's what it feels like. That's what loss could feel like or something. So what I guess I'm interested in is that there's things that happen when you do a magic trick in this theatrical way that can embody a metaphor. And part of the feeling in a magic trick is a little bit of an exhilaration, because you start to go like, wait, how did that go? And it brings you very much into this room now. So it's very present. It's the opposite actually of dramatic illusion, where you're like, I am the king of France or whatever. Like, I'm asking you to believe that I'm something I'm not. When you do a magic trick, it's actually like the audience suddenly like starts looking everywhere and they really want the floor to be the floor. And they're like, wait, what's what here? And so it's actually an invitation to be very present. So I find that whole like mechanism really fascinating on stage. And the other reason I think I use it a lot is because it actually is a very time-intensive technical thing to work on, and it's very concrete. Like, you can be in a space and it either works or it doesn't work, and you have to get the lighting right, or you have to get the vocabulary, you have to get the language right, or something has to be exactly right, and you can work on that in a very tactile, real way where it either works or it doesn't work. Whereas something that is like, did that scene work? Or like, was it funny? Sometimes you're like, I don't know, maybe, and you kind of get in that milky, like strange, vague place in a rehearsal room. So it's nice to be able to come back to something like illusion that is like very, very clear, difficult, but clear. That's an answer.
Jen, I'm curious. I sense some apathy towards the embodiment of the illusion.
It's not apathy. It's like I have this kind of like fear. So it's really disconcerting to be in a space where you think you understand what's concrete, and then to have that be defied. So it's more Geoff and Steven know that I'm a little bit more magic fearful, and I think I'm responsible for the least amount of illusions in the thing show.
When you say that you're fearful, are you saying from the perspective of you embodying kind of the trickery in the show, or just like you watching magic?
Oh, watching.
Okay.
I think I am like not aware of how I am participating in illusions. I think there's one moment where I'm like, now this one I know is happening. And then watching the show, I'm like, oh wow, how did that? I mean, I watched the show and I was like, whoa, how did that happen? I was like, Jen, you know how it happens, don't you? Like,
Steven, what is it like designing for the illusions to support them kind of technically?
It's weird. I did not grow up being super interested in magic. Like, it's cool. I like the puzzle of trying to make it work and work right. And because I've known Geoff for a while and have worked on stuff, and also because of Steve Chiffo, I've started to kind of get some vocabulary for the techniques that are used. And because most of the time I'm a visual artist and just experiment with things on my own terms in my own studio, I get to then like play with them in different ways. And then so consecutive projects working with Geoff, like there is a little bit of like ways that a non-magician can try to solve problems. Like I try to think of like the illusions a little bit like a sculptor, maybe first, because my job is to make this house, right? For things like in home, like that's like, this is in house terms, not magic terms for me. And so it's just cool. It's cool to just like try to solve the puzzle. Because I'm not in the show. I'm just responsible for like that part. So I just have to make it work. And if everybody's psyched about it, then it's like, great, we did it.
Steven, you had mentioned earlier that the idea of a literal home being a part of the piece wasn't always in the cards. Was there a singular moment where there was like a light bulb that went off where like, oh, there's going to be a house?
I mean, I think it was going to be house-ish always,
Okay.
but how that got abstracted or blown apart or put back together was one of the things. Like there was a lot of talk about having the house fall down at one point, and then maybe that was the end of the show. Maybe it wasn't, because these are all moving targets. So to design for that, it's kind of a game of like, all right, so what falls apart easily? And what and won't break every time actually. And so those kinds of things inform what house becomes, just as much as like saying we need a living room.
Mm-hmm.
We also need a wall that can fall apart and go back together, 5 times a week or whatever. So that's more what I meant. It's like we knew the concept of house and home was the kind of thing that was being explored. But what it looked like, it could have been an outline. It could have been scaffolding that like the audience was made to understand that this is the living room, or maybe the living room moved around like a grid or something. Like that kind of stuff wasn't clear initially.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've talked a lot about home, but not really about its genesis. So the Ann Arbor performance is called Home, and I'll open this question up to everyone. Could you describe the piece and its genesis? And then as part of that, what are people going to see on stage? Movement, set, music. What are we going to see?
Well, there were a couple of moments of genesis, I suppose. One was an invitation, and we had just done the object lesson, which is a solo show, though it seems like a solo show. It's really not, at the BAM Fisher. And BAM asked me to basically bring another show there, but if the idea merited it, that we would go to the Harvey, which is like a big proscenium space. And at the time, I was really not that interested or excited about the theater as theater. I was thinking more about how to just do stuff in a room, in any given room, and actually a little resistant to the idea of like, theaters with like cushy seats where you sit on a stage and have all of those rituals. But that's such a beautiful theater, and was such an incredible kind of provocation that I wanted to think of something that would specifically fit and work in that space. So that is like a big part of the puzzle, was like thinking about that space, which to me, sitting in that room meant something about scale and size. And so I also thought, whereas I had just done a kind of solo thing, I would love to do some kind of big group show. And I imagined a show that ultimately had 40 or 50 people on stage. And so I was trying to think of like what is the mechanism by which you could have that group of people, including like what is the theme. Like, so those are the things that preceded the idea of it being about house and home. But you're always kind of like have different things that you've been thinking about in various ways over time. And this idea of house and home and the difference of those two words was really where I landed. And part of that was an invitation to my sister, who became the dramaturg of the show. But my sister Stephanie, is an academic who had done years of work on this idea of house in literature and narratives of house and home, also architecture as literature, or a building itself as narrative. So she was a very, very rich, like she was this incredible wealth of information. And so in some ways, and she's family, so that had to do with kind of a home. Like there was a concept like, oh, maybe it's just like me and Steph and our mom and dad like having dinner, and that's the show, which got thrown out really quick. But that, you know, we didn't know how it would be rendered exactly. So those were like points of genesis, thinking about like huge, like a lot of people, some kind of idea of figuring out how to play with this house versus home thing. And the idea of a house where you see all of the different generations or all of the different people share, because that's a thing about at least my history of dwelling. It's like I've never lived in a house that nobody else has lived in before, and I can think about the people who might live after me. That is really interesting to me, that you're sharing space with a kind of the marks and traces and ghosts of the people that came before. And I thought, like, I wonder how you could embody that on stage. How could you show that? Those were some ideas.
Jen, can you talk a little bit about the characters or characters you embody in the show? Like, did you create a sort of backstory for yourself?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, well, this is kind of tied to what I was thinking about for the question you just asked, like, what will people see?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess if I had to like make an arc for myself, it kind of moves from the unfamiliar to the familiar and then into alienation. So, and I don't know if like there's spoiler alerts are gonna happen. So
maybe.
Okay. But you know, at first, this body is helping construct the house, and so has a relationship to house and material and not to home. You know, with other people. It's a group of us who are like realizing the project of house. And then there's a way where we're all kind of existing singularly and also coexisting. And in that section, it's a home, or becoming a home. And this thing that Geoff brings up about like awareness of other people and awareness of other narratives that have existed in the space is like happening at the same time as like personal narrative is happening. And I guess if there's any kind of like arc or like character development, it's just like how familiar is this body becoming with this space? Yeah, there's a moment when, you know, it's like those of us who are like touching like in physical proximity and relationship to this structure are getting familiar, while the audience might still feel at a distance. And then there's a moment when there's an invitation for them to familiarize themselves with this structure and its inhabitants, and with cycles, like to really get close to the idea of cycles. And then this moment where we're all invited to feel alienated from the material and from these narratives, kind of like, I don't know, complete the cycle.
From my recollection, the spoken word, the human voice, appears in very limited fashion in the show. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that decision and how it evolved and how voice is used maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can talk about that for sure. One of the things that is happening in this show is a relationship to it's an invitation for you, the audience, to do your own dreaming and your own meditation on your own history of dwelling, where you've been And for you to kind of, I really feel like the show or whatever, the performance is there for you to daydream. I do that usually when I see stuff. And a lot of times when I hear a lot of talking from the people on stage, it sort of gets in the way of that reverie. And it makes things very concrete. Like it brings us into a psychological space where we start to really ask questions about who people are and their relationships to one another that for this performance, I don't think is helpful. So part of what I wanted to see if we could do is a kind of ballet of everyday movement. And so being in the kitchen or being in the bathroom or reading a book or making tea or having trouble with, I don't know, putting up some shelves or something like that. Those are the things that kind of end up being the everyday. And that's the sort of, that's the material, as opposed to, and it's how you inhabit the house, as opposed to the things that like happen between people that happen to exist in a house, if you know what I mean. That said, there are a lot of words in the show, and most of them are sung by Elvis Perkins. And Elvis's music, it was an interesting way that collided with the show, because Elvis wasn't a part of the thing from the very beginning. It was more like Elvis is an old friend of mine from high school, and refinding one another, and then realizing that he both would want to do this and he had the availability to do it, all kind of happened in the later chapters of creation. And so in a way, Elvis really like collided with the piece in a really helpful way. His music is super poetic and dreamy. It's not like he's narrating what's happening at all. It's asking you to go like put these words against this image, and somewhere between those things you're spinning out. So it's much more poetic.
It's like it's facilitating in some ways what you described earlier about just being able to kind of let your mind wander and make meaning for yourself as an audience member in the space. I remember seeing the show the first time and, being admittedly moved to tears by virtue of kind of the way that particular show had ended. And for me, the experience in the show felt very sentimental and very sweet. And then I remember spending some time thinking about the folks I'd seen the show with, what would the experience of the show be like if I didn't have like a happy childhood? And I wonder if you spent any time thinking about, I don't know, maybe reconciling the counterpoints a piece like this might have for someone who didn't have great relationships with the idea of home.
I think there are things about the show that are very specific. So it's called Home, but it's not, I don't think that one should assume that it's purporting to be a stand-in for that idea for everybody. It's certainly not for me. And like, I feel like Geoff and I had a lot of conversations about like, this is not a home that I grew up in. However, I think that one of the biggest like illusory moments, or like in an illusion sense, is that we're watching what we understand to be very individual experiences, and that by either experiencing other people in this moment when the piece opens up, either experiencing other people like in proximity, like literally, or watching other people experience each other, and getting put into this dream space that was referenced, simply by the shock of it all. It's kind of like I feel like my experience of magic is like this, like what is going on? The destabilization that happens then, like that's where we start to ask ourselves about like our own encasements and like where am I right now? So it's not this purporting a kind of universality of the structure or the narratives, but actually like this question about like, well, what is my encasement and like how permanent is that?
Something I like to ask, what are y'all doing in the 15 minutes before you go on stage? Or in your case, Steven, if it's opening night of a show, what are you doing? What are you thinking before your creation is unveiled?
I panic. That's it.
Yeah, I wish I had a better answer. I feel like the 15 minutes prior is like having conversations with people that probably should have happened an hour prior or like a day before. And like before I know it, there we go. The whole team does have a moment together. We always make sure that we have that. That definitely happens. We have a chance to like look at each other. Say, are we doing this? Guess we're doing this.
I want to thank Geoff and Jennifer and Steven for talking with me today. And we look forward to welcoming y'all to Ann Arbor very soon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mary.